My name's Bill. I was born in Coburg, 1932, so when the war started I was just coming up about 7 years of age. School, yeah, it was much as I sort of expected it would be, except that we had to do air raid drills and things like that. So you'd have to get up and march out of your class, line up, go over the road. It was just a drill to get you from there, A to B, into the trenches and that sort of thing. I can't remember being really frightened. It was simply some things you did. And that's because you're young and you just don't think about what's likely to happen to you. You know, you can't imagine bombs falling and you hear about it happening to other people, but you don't think it's going to happen really. No. It was a drill you went through, like a lot of things you did at school, you know. It was something you did. Going back to when I was in primary school, the school was fairly close to Sydney Road. Now, Sydney Road was, as the name suggests, the main arterial road. Went to Sydney and it went to 𝑻𝒂𝒄𝒊𝒕𝒚 Army Camp. So you would see trucks going along there quite regularly, and trucks with army vehicles or towing guns or that sort of thing. So you were aware of it. You saw soldiers in the streets all the time. When I say soldiers, that's a generic term for Army, Navy, Air Force. Yeah, you'd see them around, and sometimes I don't know how you'd find out, you'd know there were trucks going along the road. So at recess or whatever, you'd race up and there's lots of trucks going on. Yeah, that was pretty good, yeah. But there was evacuation procedures put in place for school kids. And yeah, that was all quite formal. You could be privately evacuated or be evacuated by the government, I suppose you would say. And my brother and I, we were to be privately evacuated. That would have meant that we had to leave where we were living, and if you were going to be evacuated by the government, they would send you to a safe place. Now, and I think you would have been billeted out with local people, is my understanding, because from my point of view, we were going to stay with my grandparents. I don't think the fear came into it so much at all. It was just something different we were going to do, I suppose. We knew that it was war and we were going to be evacuated, possibility of it. Didn't eventuate, of course, but it was all there. Yes, you get a card, and it had 20 spaces marked out on the card, and it was war saving certificates. So what the idea was to help encourage people to save and contribute to the war efforts. Like adults, they bought war bonds and all the rest of it, which were redeemable after the war. We used to get shilling stamps. So you'd save up a shilling, which was quite a bit of money in those days. There were 20 shillings to £1, right? So you would stick 16 of these on this card, and that was redeemable at some time after the war for £1. So if you're 16 shillings, you got an extra 4 shillings some few years later. Yeah, so that was quite an exercise to try and save up these 16 shillings. I don't remember ever getting the pound back at any stage. Probably when I went to technical school, because you're getting a bit older then, and had trade workshops, obviously. And Air Force trainees used to come in and use the engineering workshops to do their training. So every morning you'd see a squad of, probably only about 20 of them, and they'd be marched in probably with their sergeant, and off they'd go and take over the workshops, which didn't feel so good for us kids because we never got to use the machines that you expected to as you went up through the grades, or when you got the third form you'd be able to use a lathe or a milling machine. Never happened. So there was that. But yeah, that was very noticeable. And also you started to realise, like when Sydney Harbour, the Japanese submarines came in, the bombing of Darwin, yeah, that made it more real. But I don't know that even while that was going on, I sort of couldn't envisage them ever coming to Melbourne. Sort of seemed too far away. You knew it was happening in Darwin, you knew Sydney got submarines and those sort of things, but perhaps just couldn't make the connection that it was actually going to happen in Melbourne. But yeah, you were much more aware of it again, yeah, for sure. Yeah, very sad story actually. He joined up in 1940. He was married, had 2 children. So he was posted to Darwin, and they were in Darwin, and when the Japanese came into the war, they were immediately posted to an island called Ambon, which is in now Indonesia. Ambon was particularly important for the Japanese because there was a deep water harbour and an airport. So they moved in force, but division of troops against one battalion. So the fighting lasted a few days and they were all captured. So they were there, started off from all accounts, and this is talking to ex-POWs, wasn't too bad. And then things got tougher. Food was more difficult to get, and some men started to get out of camp, sneak out of camp to try and get food. The Japanese warned them against it, but they persisted. And one night, 5 of them were captured coming back into camp, one of whom was my uncle. And next morning they were all paraded, and they were treated to some pretty awful treatment for the next, apparently about a week. They were tied up in the middle of the camp where they were bashed and whatever. And finally they took 10 of them away, which my uncle was one of them, and they were taken away. Now at that stage, they thought they were being taken to another prisoner of camp where the Laha men were. They, you know, because they didn't know what was going on. And yeah, they were taken away and all executed and buried in a mass grave. So I remember because we knew everyone was coming home, everyone in the pre-AW camps were being isolated, and I remember as clear as now, I was sitting in the kitchen. And I said to Mum, Uncle Arthur will be coming home soon. And of course, she burst into tears. No, he won't be. And she told me he died of illness in the camp. And that's what I was told. And it was only later I found out what happened, so a bit of research, yeah. I've asked myself that question. It's hard to know because I don't know how my childhood would have been if I hadn't been born during the war. So that's a difficult one. Yeah, it did have an impact. You're aware of that there was a war going on. You're aware that, yeah, people were getting killed and that sort of thing. As I said, the fact that the air raid precautions were on, you had to be careful of that sort of thing. You knew about how close the war came to Australia because I mentioned earlier the bombing of Darwin, you're aware of that. Yes, I suppose it did have an impact on. You didn't really, like we talked about rationing before, no one starved because of rationing. Yeah, there was just things you couldn't get and things were scarce and you had to be a bit more careful of things and that sort of thing, and you're aware of, yeah, as I say, because of the air raid precautions and all those sort of things that went on, and you were told how to act in case there was bombing. It sounds pretty silly now, but you were told to lie down in the gutter and you put your elbows down, so if there was an impact there, you would fall forward and, you know, all those sort of things. So yeah, they did have an impact, I suppose.